Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Dennison. I am a speaker, author, and voice for those who are trying to find their way through this crazy world that we're living in and build something better. Today's the day after the election results came in. It is Thursday the 10th, and yesterday we woke up to the news that Donald Trump is our next president of our United States. And I thought today I would try to take a few minutes and look back on what we've seen over the last several months and project out where we might be going from here, and a little bit about what this movement behind the Trump election was all about. Because there seems to be a lot of misunderstanding and misstatements by those who are upset about the Trump election from the left. And rightfully so, because Trump has stated positions that they are decidedly against. His personal characteristics, his brash talk, his insults to people of all types are not particularly going over very well with many aspects of the American public. They feel he's racist and sexist and xenophobic and more. And I'm not going to get into what he is or is not. This is not a referendum on Trump. What it is a discussion that we're going to talk about today of the Trump movement, the so-called revolution, political revolution that has just taken place in our country, and to help you try to understand a little bit more about what was behind it and what it's about and how you might adjust your course to negotiate the obstacles that are going to be coming up here over the next few years. Excuse me. All right, the first thing that comes to mind is that this Trump phenomena took place because there is a growing sense of disconnect between the government and the people. This sense of disconnect extends to people in all walks of life, and it comes from the feeling that many have that the government is built to serve a privileged few as opposed to the people at large. Now, I remember the same conversation being had with people on the left, the progressives, when Obama was in office, when they were trying to get Obama and Nancy Pelosi and others to take stands against certain issues, which were the progressive wing of the party was not particularly enamored with, and they were coming out doing heavy email campaigns to Pelosi, trying to get her to come out against various legislation that she was directing through Congress. And she was being unresponsive to her own base. And so this is not a phenomenon of the left or the right, because the left is equally dissatisfied with at least the progressive side of the left is equally dissatisfied with the actions that are being taken place that are taking place within the government, because they seem to be serving a corporate elite that is just doing more and more polluting, more and more raping of our natural resources, destroying our water supplies, and creating a system that is built to serve the few at the top and not the ones at the bottom. And this same position that the progressives have against this corporatocracy, that has insinuated itself into all aspects of our government at all levels, is the same emotion, the same feeling that is affecting many on the right as well. This is not a phenomenon of left or right. This is a phenomenon between the people that the government either serves them or does not. And this is a very real emotion that is being experienced by many people today. And it's something that if you're going to be working in the effort of trying to make a difference, you have to be aware that a lot of the people you're going to serve don't trust the government. They don't believe that the government is there to serve them, and in fact, it has served everybody but them. Now, that ire against the government was turned toward the Democrats this time, but could have just as easily been turned toward the Republicans under George Bush, because it's the same policies that we have seen and it carried out for the last 20 or 30 years. And it's been moving us farther and farther and farther down this corporatocracy road, where we are being ruled by the business interests that are manipulating our affairs and poisoning the water so that the people's will cannot be enacted. This is not a factor of left or right. This is a class warfare between those who are in power and those who are not. And those who are feeling disempowered were at the bottom and the core of this Trump revolution, because they were feeling that the government wasn't serving them, even though they were doing everything to play by the rules and do what was called of them. But they were being ignored. Their needs were being pushed aside, and instead that they were seeing their government pursuing this agenda of serving a privileged few. Now, this agenda of the few would be bad enough as is, but unfortunately it's gotten tied up in partisan politics, so that those who have supported the Democrats now see this attack on partisan politics as not to be an attack upon the elites that the progressive wing was into, or that was being raised by many of the Trump supporters in the election cycle, but that it's now an attack upon, I guess the term would be special interests. The attack upon minorities, upon women, attacks upon immigrants, basically upon anyone who threatens to upset the status quo or to change the nature of American society. So again, you have to understand that there are always people that don't want to change the status quo. The status quo serves them. But in this case, the status quo, it wasn't the status quo of one of a white supremacist nation that so many have seemed, and the left have seemed to prop up and say that this is what Trump is about, and therefore paint all of Trump's supporters with this brush. It has been more one that they are using this issue of white nationalism to point out the fact that they're black, or they're Hispanic, or they are Muslim, or some other group that does not consider itself of a majority, other than the fact that it has taken part in this coalition to keep the Democrats in power. So we see these power games that are going on. But it is this partisan politics which has so distorted the picture of what's going on in this election. So again, I may ask you to take a step back from your partisanship, to really think about these issues, because these issues are not going to go away. Just like the issues of treating people fairly, without discrimination, without oppression, without taking away their rights and preserving their rights to free speech and their rights to pursue their own dissent and to live a lifestyle that they choose. These are all things that, believe it or not, the right supports, just like the left does. It's just that in the heat of the political season, those issues are brought forward and propped up as if that's the reason why somebody is voting. When in fact, those are issues that are being used to divide you and to distract you from the real issue, which is this non-responsiveness of government to the people, and instead of responsiveness of the creation of a ruling class that is tied in to this corporatocracy, or these corporate and donor overlords, because as we saw from the WikiLeaks emails from Podesta, that they refer to a donor class, and they refer to their special interests, and their special interests are the one that they were talking about, and these are all of the different groups, the fragmentations that they carve people up into little pieces, and they make promises to enact things to advance those small groups, or the interests of those pieces or those groups. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. You have to understand that it is the partisanship, this identification with a particular group or a side or an interest or agenda that is tainting our ability to see the situation objectively. This is not a time for objectivity in our world. This is a time of intense subjectivity. And if you will notice that everyone sees things the way that they see them, and they don't care what anyone else says. They're getting more and more and more entrenched in their own views, whatever side that they're on. And they're unable to reach any sort of a compromise because they don't consider the validity of how the other side thinks and sees the situation. We've been watching this show recently called Brain Dead. I think it's on Amazon. And Brain Dead is about these alien bugs that come into Earth, and they start taking over, basically climbing into inside the eardrum of people while they're sleeping, and taking and eating away half of their brain and then controlling them. And they feed into this anger that is growing up. And what you see in Brain Dead is that both sides just start screaming at each other. They get louder and louder and louder, and they get so entrenched in their own beliefs that they just can't even have room for compromise. They can't even have room to see that there is a path that there can be paths that serve the interest of all, because they get so attached to one view that they don't even consider that another view might get us there as well. But what happens is rarely do either side consider a compromise that will take us to the third path that everybody might be able to buy into. Well, anyway, in Brain Dead, the people were just going plain old nuts, and they're fighting each other, and these aliens have taken over a good chunk of the government and Congress, and they're trying to foment unrest and to develop this energy and this fear so that it gives them more opportunities to control people. So I understand that if you are partisan and you see things either as a Democrat or a Republican, I understand that. And it's okay. It's the way our system is designed. But you have to understand that there are forces playing into this partisanship that are being used to manipulate you into supporting their quest for power as opposed to someone else's quest for power. Going back to this Trump movement, though, a very big theme besides discontent with the with the government and its disconnect from the people is this globalism, this march to globalism versus what Trump calls a new birth of Americanism or nationalism. And let's set aside the labels for a minute and look at what it was we were talking and what's actually going on here. What we have here, we talked about the disconnect between the people and this ruling class that is insulated from them. And in fact, there was a book, I can't remember who wrote it, back in the 90s called Who Will Tell the People? That the people that Washington just are totally insulated. They don't respond to the needs of the people. They do what is necessary to perpetuate and play the games of the Beltway. And unfortunately, that's very real. The Beltway mentality is ingrained in Washington, and they are out of touch with much of the country. But this globalism versus Americanism is a reaction to what has been an increasing effort to take decisions affecting our personal and national interests and transfer these so-called up the line to these more global organizations that we are cooperating with. Because the right sees a movement to create a one world government or a global government by control through controlling the systems and processes by which people act, and by manipulating and paying off the people and getting them beholden to each other and to the ruling class and not to the people. And this has been the general feeling that we've had for many years, is that the government has been serving this ruling class, and has been serving the donor class, but it has not been serving we the people. And this globalism has, that what we saw, the fight against that was in Brexit against the EU, and in here it's against the TPP and the other two agreements that the U.S. has been putting together. Because the United States has been at the center of this globalist movement, because those who have been trying to put together this global action, including the central bankers, the Rothschilds, and many others who have been behind this, who have been trying to amass more and more and more control into a bureaucratic set of leaders that they appoint, that are not appointed by the people of the respective countries that are involved. That was the reason why why Britain left the European Union this summer in the Brexit vote, and it was a very strong factor behind many who took place in the United States in the U.S. election for Bush, for Trump, because they did not want this ongoing march to globalism to continue, because it happened since it was started by Bill Clinton himself back when he put NAFTA in place and repealed Glass-Steagall. This opened the door for the jobs flowing out of the country, of the middle class, and which was this same middle class that has come back and said, hey, what about us? This is the silent American voter. There was a Rust Belt that has come back, and they had voted Democrat for decades. And now all of a sudden they have come back and said, no, this ain't serving us. This ain't taking us where we're going to go, where we want to go, because their jobs have gone. And they've gone from jobs where they're making very good money to all of a sudden where they can barely get, where they're barely able to get more than a minimum wage job. And we see what's happening in Flint, in Detroit, and other places through the Midwest as the infrastructure has totally crumbled. And the inner cities are in chaos. There are wars being fought on the street. And this is a direct result of this march to globalism that has been taking place. And many people within the Trump movement were very, very upset over this, that they did not want their sovereignty passed along up the line. They wanted the sovereignty to stay with the people. And if the people vote to do something, then that's okay. Maybe. Some people may not like that. But the basis behind the Trump revolution, or this Trump movement, at this point had to do with the feelings toward the globalism and the negative impacts of globalism upon the American economy. And we've seen the American economy just continue to go deeper and deeper and deeper into the hole, into the dumps over the last 20 or 20 years. And to boot, we have seen as the economy's been going down and the welfare of the people has been going down, the national debt and the money that they've been spending to pursue these policies of aggression and empire have been going up. And so we're being left with these terrible burdens of debt that nobody addresses. Neither of the candidates talked about it this year, but the national debt is at almost $20 trillion and climbing. And regardless of which one was elected, it's projected to continue going up from there. Both of them were pursuing policies that were going to be continuing to increase it. I expect Trump to continue to do the same. Again, so those who are concerned about the welfare and the financial well-being of their country are going to continue to have to be concerned with Trump in the office, just as they were have to be concerned with Obama, who raised it from $8 trillion to $12 trillion, and Bush, I think, took it from 4 to 8. And it's just and so they each keep coming in and more than doubling it. So if things were going according to the same course, then again in another 8 years we would see a $40 trillion debt. Well, totally unsustainable. But this seems to be where our country is, that we don't seem to have the political will to address the issue of our overspending. And I'm not going to get into the reasons of why the overspending. We all know it. We have a combination of a very large social state that's been set up. as well, and that many are trying to grow even larger. And we have a very large military that has created an empire at the direction of our political leaders around the world, that they have continually just gobbled up countries and asserted their will over them and left troops. And now we have troops, what, at like 175 bases or something like that around the world. It's just ridiculous. But this is the atmosphere that we're involved in. A third issue that was very important, this came about as a result of the corruption, the cronyism, and what was considered by many to be amoral behavior by those in leadership positions. That there is a sense when you look at Washington that it's more like Caligula's Rome, where there's absolutely no morality, no standards, and a lot of people still have strong moral beliefs about how men and women should act and conduct themselves. And when you start seeing things about trading influence for large donations to one's political campaign, or for exorbitant speaking fees to a former president who was not getting those kind of speaking fees until his wife gets to be Secretary of State, it looks wrong. It smells wrong, and people get upset. When you see a president that refuses to allow an attorney general who refused to allow the FBI to do an investigation into the Hillary Clinton's email situation when she was at the State Department, and do a proper investigation there. That looks wrong. But it's this cronyism. It's worse than the corruption. Because the corruption, when it's blatant, it can be addressed. But the cronyism is something that's accepted, as well as this other aspect of life in Washington that goes along with it, which is the quid pro quo. You help me, I'll help you. You do something for me, I'll do something for you. And that was what it was with Clinton's. Yeah, you do something for my foundation, give them some money. I'll do something for you as Secretary of State and give you weapons contracts or whatever else, or sell your company, sell Russia uranium, 20% of our uranium deposits. Again, those things don't smell right. They don't pass the sniff test. And these were things that some of the Trump voters were upset about. Another thing that really got to a lot of people, and it got to me as well, was this media partisanship. Do you realize how hard it is to get unbiased reporting these days from anybody? I used to hear Obama and the Clintons complain about what they're now calling the alt-right, like Breitbart News and InfoWars, because they were coming out with this view, this perspective of what they were seeing was this conspiracy going to change your world, to change you, to transform everybody into this picture of what they thought the world should be. And it was a world that was corrupted. It was a world that was amoral. And it was a world that practiced behavior that most of us would find offensive, and under our laws are, because of the allegations of pedophilia and the child trafficking rings and the ties to the Clintons, or the alleged ties to the Clintons, are extremely disturbing for many people. And so that raised the ire and brought up this voting bloc to say, enough is enough. We can't stand it. We can't keep taking more and more of this abuse. But the list kept going on and on. Because I've actually stopped and wrote a list down today, so make sure I covered what I wanted to get through with you. We talked about it. There's an abusive process, an abuse of power that's going on within our government at all levels of our government. And I think we see this in the Black Lives Matter. They talk about what they consider an abuse of power of the police department, where some police officers are shooting unarmed black men for resisting arrest, or that they think is resisting arrest when in fact it may not be. And they are claiming it as racism. No. Perhaps it is in those situations with those officers, but I would point out that the police officers are also shooting unarmed white men at the same rate. So that may be just an abuse of police power, excuse me, that we have allowed some of these bad apples to get into the police departments. And granted, there are people in our country that are still racist, that still dislike other races. But it's not limited to whites. And I resent when you try to paint all whites as racist simply because we're white, that we have some sort of white privilege or white prejudice against other people. Because those that I know that are on the right will stand for the freedom of speech and the other freedoms that are reserved for you in the Bill of Rights, when other people's won't, when they'll expect you to shut up and toe the party line. And maybe there are times that you do want to toe the party line, and that is what you believe. But there are other times where you will have situations where you don't believe that, where you may not feel good about what they're doing, but they're going to do it anyway, and they're going to expect you to support them and back them up because they're your party. And this partisanship is part of what's happening here that has really been poisoning the atmosphere on both sides, because Trump has not been the kind of person any of us would want him to be in some of the things that he has said. And I don't think if you carry those out to the logical conclusions, that the demonstrators that were demonstrating in the street were talking about yesterday, when all the students came out and were marching through the streets in these well-coordinated campaigns throughout most of our major cities. Certainly not a spontaneous demonstration. Not when they're showing up with bullhorns and leading people in chants and things like this. That's certainly too well organized to be spontaneous. But this abuse of power has to stop. It has to be abuse of power at all levels. And going along with the abuse of power is the abuse of the processes that have been set up within our system. And we'll talk about the abuse of processes. I guess the best example that I have for this is when the Democrats were trying to pass through Obamacare. And if you recall, going back to that about 8 years ago, 7 years ago, when Obama proposed the bill was never submitted to Congress so people could see it and read it. In fact, Nancy Pelosi said, well, vote for it and then we'll tell you what's in it. Well, this is a process that is not provided for in our Constitution. It's not a process that's followed by our Congress or anything. It's not the way it's supposed to work. We're not supposed to be cutting off discussion. We're supposed to be encouraging discussion. We want to encourage discussion and the points of view from all the extremes as well as the people in the middle. But what we've had is a government that has tended to abuse those processes, and parties that have taken advantage of and changed the process to suit their needs. And they do what they can do to stack the deck in their favor at every turn. If you watched the Project Veritas videos and you saw how the Democrats were cheating in terms of sending people out to the elections and lying and setting up these consultants in between them and the crimes that they were committing, or the actions they were doing to throw the election, or to so-called rig the election, which was to skew the way people would see and vote. They thought everything that they do is okay. They hate the Republicans so much that they're willing to do anything to stop them. Anything. Now, I don't know what the Republicans have done to make them feel that way. besides the fact that they are both diametrically opposed to each other because they both want power and they both have really nebulous philosophical foundations behind what they say. But we're starting to see this power shift in our country. And it is the shifting of power which is what's really behind this Trump movement, is the fact that the people are standing up and saying that they do not want their government to keep going the way that it's going. They want it to be more responsive. They want it to be fairer. They want it to be less oppressive. They want it to have less surveillance. They want it to be more secure and free of the shenanigans that some are trying to pull to distort both our political process and the cultural makeup of our country. Now, there is a constant process of the culture of our country evolving. And each new generation of immigrants that comes into our country brings a new blood and a new perspective and a new way of doing this, and a new blood and ideas to this process. And generally speaking, it's been a very good process, though it has been fought tooth and nail over the years between parties on people on both parties on both sides and the people who support them. But in the situation we're dealing with here, we have parties that will do anything for power. We saw that with the Democrats. I have to assume that the Republicans will be the same way. But what we have, the Republicans that will do anything for power, set this one out. So those who supported Trump weren't the power establishment of the Republicans. It was a groundswell of support from the people that said these power games have to stop, or at least that they don't like the results of how they're being played. So where do we go from here? Where do we go from here? Well, obviously, there are concerted efforts being made right now to create this resistance to Trump. I have a feeling that Trump is not going to have any support anywhere in the country from almost any side, because he didn't have any when he was getting elected. All of the institutions of power were coming out against him because he was talking about dismantling those. Whether he is going to be able to, or whether they have too strong a hold over that power, this remains to be seen. But what we're going to see is a revival of the effort to get a constitutional amendment to limit for term limits in Congress in order to get the president, to get some of the influence money out of Congress. And there have been other constitutional amendments proposed before, particularly from the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. But this one amendment tells you that it's going to be an issue of control of the people versus control of the moneyed interests. So that's going to be a big fight that we're going to see coming down the road. Immigration is a big fight. And many people have been upset that we have been that immigration has been used through these globalist policies, we'll call them this, that have fostered dislocation in the Middle East and Africa, that have in South and Central America, that have had large amounts of immigrants that have been flowing both into Europe and the United States. The immigrants here are coming from Central America and Mexico, probably. And I don't really know the breakdown of whether they're coming, what the percentages are, but I know a large number of them are coming from places farther south of Mexico, and they're passing through Mexico to get to the United States for opportunity. And I understand them coming here. So we're going to be having but the masses in which they have been coming have been making a seismic shift in our cultural affairs, just like the Syrian and African immigrants going into Europe are creating major problems in Europe right now, culturally, because it's just too fast to assimilate these changes. And many of the people are coming in and they don't want to change. They don't want to assimilate. and the societies don't have the ability to. They're already struggling financially, and now you're bringing all these poor people in without jobs or housing or ability to consume. And the state is weighed down by all these new people that are coming in. So as you trying to decide how you're going to serve in the future, you need to be aware that the process of dealing with these issues is not going to be a black and white case, and that's a black and white situation. Immigration is a fact of life, but immigration on the scale that we know it, without any sort of controls or efforts to control it, are going to be creating more and more resentment between those who have been here and those who are coming. Those who are coming, the Democratic Party has wanted to bring them in because wants to shift them and then find ways to get them past the citizenship so that they can vote and so that they can lock in future generations of Democratic voters and thereby rebuild the electorate to continually vote Democratic in all elections. And some people will say that would be a wonderful thing. But unfortunately, we saw what happened from it was that the Democrats are no longer responsive to the people either. They're responsive to this corporate elite and the donor class, as well as those who directly buy their favor, like they've tried to do with the Clintons. This is a struggle which is going to continue, and it has very little to do with race or and I'm sorry to my Hispanic friends. This is not the immigration is not a racial issue. It's not an issue of antagonism toward Hispanics. I live here in Florida. We have a large, diverse population here, and it's fine. It's great. It's great. But when you take a stable situation and you move in large amounts of people, you upset the apple cart, and you have to figure out, well, how you're going to take care of those people. They're going to be depressing wages of the people that are there. And granted, many of them are coming in as farm workers and taking these low-paying jobs that many Americans just don't want to do. And I understand that, and I understand the need for the workers. But I also understand that there's got to be some need for balance. That somewhere, if we're going to have laws, the laws need to be enforced. Not selectively enforced, but enforced according to the laws. If you don't want the laws, then you go to Congress and you get rid of the laws. That's fine. If the people say that they want open borders, that's fine. But we haven't had a discussion of people wanting open borders. The open borders has just been something that they've just been invited in and just come on in, and we really haven't done much about it. And so what's happened, this Trump idea of building a wall is bringing focus to the issue that somehow or other we have to slow down this massive migration. I personally believe that a large portion of this migration is happening as a result of the policies that we are pursuing around the world. Policies of the corporate policies that are helping to prop up the rich at the expense of the working class and the poor, and then by pitting the people against each other. And our efforts of empire of going off and conquering the world and spreading our brand of democracy, which really is not a brand of democracy as much as it is a brand of capitalism to serve those who can influence the president to allow them to come on his coattails when he goes into these countries and plunder like carpetbaggers did in the South. This has to stop. These policies that we're pursuing, that we've been pursuing, where we're killing people by drones indiscriminately around the world in areas where we have no business doing this, is wrong. And so as a result of our policies, we have started these migrations of people all around the world trying to get away from the horrors that we have inflicted or allowed to be inflicted because of those policies. So if we're going to really address the issues of immigration, we need to address the policies that are creating the large waves of immigrants. And we also need to be able to say, okay, what is it within our hearts and how is it that we can help? And again, We are a very compassionate people. But the question is, how do you help others when you first can't help yourself? And so the American people are starting to look inward and say, well, we got to take care of our own first before we can keep bringing all of these people in. Maybe some of them we can bring in, but we can't keep the hordes coming and keep upsetting our apple cart, because the social fabric of our country is going to be destroyed. So you have these competing interests, and then you have those who are going to take advantage of it and say that anyone who is against them coming in is a racist. Because this has been a very convenient tactic followed by the globalists as well as the left, by labeling people, by disparaging them, by calling them names, by assigning disparaging titles to them like racist or sexist, that they think if people believe it, then they will automatically discount whatever they have to say. Well, there are racists who are black. There are racists who are Hispanic. But hate is not, and there are certainly racists that are white people. And racism is this harboring of fear and dislike and antagonism towards other people that are just different than you. And I don't condone it in any form. But I don't believe that we should be allowing others to push our buttons and put us at odds with each other. Because we have differing views over what to do with this mass of people that is invading our country. Now, Trump's idea is to put up a wall. I personally think that's a misguided effort. But that was one of his first policies, and he's going to try to enact it when he takes office next year. And whether he does that or not, we still have to do something to solve the problem. And the problem isn't putting these people and making them legal. The problem is, what do we do to slow down and stop the problem? And then we can figure out what to do with the ones who are here that weren't supposed to be here. And we have all these compelling stories about families being split apart that nobody wants to see happen. And nobody wants to see Mexicans or other immigrants living in fear that the INS is going to come and do a raid and lock them up and send them out of the country. And then they have to try to figure out how to get back here to their families. Nobody wants to see any of this. But we also don't want to see our country being overrun by those who have no commitment to America. That they come here and have not had a chance to assimilate, yet are being used as pawns in a power game to distort the issues and give power to a ruling elite that wants to divide us and keep us weak so that they can rule us and plunder us and continue taking advantage of us at every turn. This is the basis of how I would hope you will be going forward, is to be able to see these factors at play on both sides, that there are some who want to roll the clock back to an America that was more like it was in the 50s, where it was mom and apple pie, mom and the flag and apple pie. That's probably never going to happen again. But I don't think that that's what was really behind the Trump movement. The forces behind the Trump movement are the same forces that are behind the progressive movement, that our government isn't serving us. And if we're going to go forward to try to create a better world, we have to find a way to make the government responsive to the people. Because if the government isn't responsive to the people, then the people will become nothing more than drones working for a moneyed class and told what to do and we will not have any ability to determine the course of our own affairs. Granted, there are deep divisions within our electorate. That's a given. And granted that if you were a Hillary supporter, you probably will not like what I'm saying today. And if you were a Trump supporter, you probably would not like saying some of the things I said about Trump today. But I ask you all to please look within yourselves and say, well, what is it that matters to you? What really matters? Is it that you are so identified with these special interests that they've said you're a part of that you have to go off and allow yourself to be triggered into these stands against people because of this group politics? Or can you make up your own mind? Can you be a sentient being that says, I understand what's going on here. I see the issues. I see the emotions that are playing out. But I'm going to try to keep myself above that fray for at least long enough so I can make an objective decision on how to move forward into the future. We have a better world to create. And that better world for us starts right here in the United States. And the Trump movement is a start of the people standing up, not for racism, not for xenophobia, not for sexism, not for misogyny, but the people are standing up for a sense of what is right and wrong and what they want their government to represent for them. They do not want these ongoing wars continually fought in their behalf. They do not want to be plundered by the wealthy, who then turn around and manipulate our electoral system and our government to get what they want and rule against the interests of the people. This is a wave of populism that is coming up around the world. This is about the people who are tired of the governments not serving them the way they want. There are those who will try to manipulate these emotions and these energies that are flowing within you and me and all the rest of us. They're going to try to get us to fight with each other and turn on each other and make it so that we cannot go forward together. And if you get yourself so caught up in the partisan blinders that so many people have seen this election with, that you cannot, that you allow yourself to be manipulated and drawn down this path of conflict and control and oppression in favor of rule by those who are not responsive to you, the people, then you're going to find that the results that you have are going to keep taking us farther and farther toward the corporatocracy. But if you want to stop the corporatocracy, if you want to restore power to the people, regardless of which direction the people want to go in, and every 4 or 8 years, we're going to be zigzagging in another direction. That's just the way that we do it in our system, because we went too far. And now many have stood up in the Trump movement to say enough is enough. You are working to build a better world. You want to build a better world. You don't want to be caught up in all this partisanship, but you do want some sense of right and wrong restored to your affairs. Because if you didn't, you wouldn't be listening to me. If you believe that there is a better way, a better world that can be built, I strongly ask that you reject the Machiavellian principle that the end justifies the means, and you begin to act that how you act is as important as where you're trying to go. You must be the example that you want the world to see. And if this is an example of love and caring and compassion, then that should transcend everything. And if it is a person of conflict, of contentiousness, of trying to get your way no matter what, then you will be perpetuating this conflict that has seen such a great divide in our country. So I ask you as we conclude today, that you try to rise above the fray and look to see what is the right thing. We must hold our leaders accountable for doing the right thing and for serving the interests of the people first, not themselves, not their friends in office, and not the donors who empowered them to get there. I'm John Dennison, peaceoptions.com. I thank you for joining me today. Please like and share this video so others can see it too, and perhaps spread the message to your friends. Talk to them, not to question them or challenge them on what they believe, but to ask them what they really believe at their core, what they really want, what they really stand for. Let's find the way to connect together at what we believe inside, what our core beliefs are, and not the ones that are thrown up on the news to try to get us all riled up. We don't need to be triggered any more than we are. It's time to take a step back, to take a deep breath, and move forward into the future, because this movement is not going to stop, and it is not about Trump, and it is not limited to Trump. This is a movement for the people to have the right of self-determination to set their own course through the future without the distorting influence of money and power that we see today. If you agree with me, please leave a comment below. I'd like to hear what you have to say. Either way, thanks again for visiting with me today. I'm John Dennison. Go with love.